to this seminar today, webinar today. Just a couple of items of housekeeping before we get started. The session will be recorded, so if you might wish to pop your video off, and your microphones will be muted. But we would encourage some questions. Please pop them in the chat, and I'll be monitoring the questions and assisting with that. I think the webinar will be archived on the website most likely tomorrow. So if you wish to go back and view the webinar or share it with your friends, you'll have the opportunity to do that. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome my colleague Joanna. I'm Gillian McNeil, and Joanna Courtney is a fellow speech and language therapist at Call Scotland. She has a wealth of experience of supporting learners with AAC, and today is going to focus on alternative methods for AAC on iPad. So look forward to your webinar, Joanna, and I'll be popping in some links for you into the chat as well. Joanna's prepared quite a number of links that you might want to go in and maybe copy and paste even, so you can go back to them later to help with some guidance on the items covered today. So over to you, Joanna.
Okay, thanks, Gillian. Hi, everybody. I'm going to be, as Gillian said, talking about alternative access on the iPad, and particularly in relation to AAC. So hopefully some good hints and tips. And as Gillian said, if you post any questions in the chat, she will be monitoring them. And then at the end, we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A. And you can either type in the chat or pop your mics on at the end and ask any questions. So I hope it'll be useful. Let's get started. Okay, I just check you can see that okay, Gillian?
Perfect, yes.
Right, okay. So we're going to be talking about alternative access methods for AAC on the iPad. So the first thing I thought we'd go into is what are alternative access methods? So there are three different types of alternative access. Direct access, in which the learner's selecting a specific target directly by either pointing, pressing, eye gaze, or using alternative keyboards, keyguards, styluses of various types, or touch settings. Eye gaze, making direct selections with your eyes, using your eyes to act as the mouse. And then there's indirect access, where a learner's selecting a target given a set of choices. So this could be by switch scanning, visual or auditory scanning, partner assisted scanning, perhaps using eye contact or vocalization to initiate your selection. And there are a whole load of alternative access equipment, most of which now are available for access on the iPad too. So joysticks, trackballs, keyboards, switches, and even eye gaze. And if you want to find out more about various access equipment, we do have a Call Scotland loan bank. So if you're in Scotland, you are able to access the loan bank, and you can search for items and you can borrow them for a learner or for an adult in Scotland for up to 2 months to try them out before you purchase them. So that's worth knowing about. Okay, so alternative access methods are sort of common examples in terms of AAC. So using a switch, using joysticks, tracker balls, and starting to use eye gaze access now to AAC as well on the iPad. So I'm going to kind of cover some of the most common ones that I come across when I'm out in schools. Because we've only got 20 minutes, so I'm going to pick the kind of most common things that I come across and some useful settings. So when we're talking about direct access, firstly, so someone that has a difficulty in accessing the iPad screen directly, there are a variety of alternatives that you can use. So this can include various keyguards. So there are keyguards to go specifically with apps. So many of the communication aids, which are iPad based, have their own keyguards that you can get from the company. And there are also companies like Dad in the Shed, where you can get bespoke keyguards for various AAC apps and screen setups on the iPad. So you can use key guards and also various styli. So I was in a school last Thursday with a young lady who has been desperate to use the iPad, using super keys and clicker writer, but she's been using her nose to access the screen, and she's actually very effective using her nose, but obviously not very good for her posture, her neck, etc. And also as she goes into high school, you know, wanting to be kind of socially acceptable, fit in with everybody else, we tried out a range of styli, and this T-bar stylus, which is one you can get from several companies, including Liberator, was a real, worked really well for her. So you can see on the bottom right there, she's using the Super Keys keyboard with her T-bar stylus in her right hand, and she was able to make selections really accurately. And in fact, there she's typing into a digital maths PDF where she's typing in her chimney sums using the Super Keys keyboard. So a stylus can be just such a good method of enabling direct access. So things to think about first before we go anywhere near indirect access. So lots of things to try out. So accessible keyboards that I just mentioned there. So there are several that we find very useful, and some of the AAC apps, for example, Proloquo to Go, for one example, can use alternative keyboards from alternative iOS keyboards. So any iOS keyboard, accessible keyboard that you have purchased on your iPad can then be used within the AAC app. So this is Kidogo Plus, which we really like, the kind of the colourful one there with the yellow buttons. You can set different colour schemes, fonts, you can set predictions, and it's really nice kind of child-friendly keyboard. And the other one there on the right is the Super Keys app. So this, again, this is within Clicker Writer that you can have this Super Keys accessibility feature, but you can also buy the Super Keys app as a standalone keyboard app, which will work across your iPad. So that's what that learner was doing, typing into the maths PDFs. And it's a two-hit keyboard. So it means that when the learner touches the block with the letters in it, that block will expand and give a nice large target for the learner to access either with their hand or with a stylus, for example. So two really popular ones that we use a lot out and about with learners. So iPad's accessibility in general, so on the iPad, there are lots of inbuilt accessibility features, particularly, and these are ones that are particularly good in terms of AAC. So firstly, looking at guided access. So for those of you who might not know about that, guided access is something you can set up where you can lock a learner into a particular app or lock selections of the screen. And you can set that up so that the learner does not keep coming out of the app and going into to other activities. And hopefully Gillian's going to pop a link to a nice guide that we've got in our posters section on how to set that up. So that's really useful, particularly with learners who maybe are not so focused and wanting to come out and go and explore the iPad. Also really nice for limiting access to parts of the screen like the settings and the editing features. Touch accommodations, which I'm going to go into, and switch control built in as well into the iPad, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Other settings that are useful, speak selection, hearing text back, speaking the screen, and typing feedback as well, which I quite often put on when I'm using Kidogo, so that when the child's typing out the words, they're having the words spoken back to them as well, so they're getting that auditory cue as well. And then obviously things within screen time, content and privacy to avoid apps being deleted, in-app purchases, that kind of thing, really useful to set up within the iPad to avoid any mishaps. And if you want to know more about kind of iPad accessibility in general, there's a really nice YouTube video on our channel, which is a link to which Gillian's going to post, an intro to accessibility on the iPad by Craig, which was done a few years ago, but it's really, really useful, gives you an overview of the accessibility features generally across the iPad. So we're going to start off thinking about direct access in terms of a pupil who I'm seeing at the moment called Max, and he uses the Clicker Communicator app with super keys, which I've just shown you. He's got varied tone. He's in primary 1. He is very, very he's a little boy who wants to be like everybody else. He's very persistent. He wants to do things as quickly as possible, and he has some speech. So things have to be quick for him, or he's not going to use the communication app. So we've been trying super keys, but he finds it a bit slow for him. So we're also trying out touch accommodations within the iPad accessibility settings, which I'm going to show you in a minute, with a whole duration time. So the nice thing about this is within Clicker Communicator, you can either have the super keys, or we can set up the whole duration time for when he's, so he has a hold down time when he's pressing the buttons. Now some apps, other have got built-in hold down times, dwell times, but Clicker Communicator, you can use the touch accommodations within the iPad. And the nice thing about that is too, that when you set the touch accommodations up within the iPad, it means they can use those hold down times across the iPad in other apps. So they could go into Book Creator, make a story, they could go into other apps and use them with those touch accommodations. And that could mean he doesn't need super keys and he doesn't need a key guard. So it really opens up the iPad to him. And he's doing really well with the touch accommodations. So I'm going to show you touch accommodations and how you set it up. So if I go into the settings on the iPad and I go into general, sorry, no, I don't go into general, I'm going down a bit here. I'm going into accessibility, and then you'll see all the accessibility features there. And I go down to physical and motor and go to touch. And then there's several different settings here, but we're going to look at touch accommodations. So if I press that one, this is where you can set your hold down time. So I've set it for, as you see, 0.45 seconds. There are others that are more complex swipes and things you can set up. But for this learner and for this example, I'm just going to show you a simple hold down time. So 0.45 seconds. And then if I toggle that on at the top, it says touch accommodations enabled, and I can triple click to get out of it. So now I'm going to come down, and now I've got my touch accommodations on over my iPad. So I'm now going to find sounding board. So as you can see, when I'm touching the keyboard, there's the little circles going round, 0.45 second dwell time. So if I just touch accidentally, nothing's going to happen. But when I hold down for 0.45 seconds, it makes the selection. And it means for an app like, in fact, yeah, let's show it in this. If I go into sounding board, for example, instead of accidentally selecting things, I've got to hold down.
Banana.
And hold down for that 0.45 seconds to make my selection.
Who? Happy. Turn the page.
So that's really nice, really simple to set up, and you can obviously play around with the hold down times there. And I'll just show you as well, Clicker Communicator. So he's trying the hold down time, which would look like this, where I'd have to hold it down for that 0.45 seconds. But also in Clicker Communicator, you have this unique feature, this accessibility feature of super keys, where if we toggle it on, it gives you that block, or the 2-hit block. So when you open up that block, then you have a nice large target. And then it closes again. So that's a unique feature within Clicker, that super keys feature, which is really nice. But you can get the super keys keyboard, which will work across the iPad. But that's the only AAC app with that 2-hit feature within it. So that is really nice. Okay, I'm going to toggle that off just now. So I'll just go back to my accessibility and back to my touch, and I'll just go back to touch accommodations, and I'll just turn that off. And there you go, and back to normal again. Okay, so that's a little bit about touch accommodations. The next person I'm going to talk about is a young man, Tom, who started off using a step-by-step with a head switch, using auditory prompts were his strength. He had a good head switch press to simple communication technology and a flexi mount attached to his wheelchair with the head switch attached. But he wanted to develop his access to music, videos and communication as well. So to start him off, we just made simple 4-button auditory prompt communication boards on sounding board with things he liked and things he didn't like, and a Bluetooth switch interface. It was the Blue 2 that's down on the bottom right there. There are other switch interfaces too, and I'm going to show you other options in a minute. But we used that one, and you set it up with the iPad, and then within Sounding Board and a few of the other apps, you have built-in switch scanning that you can set up. So he developed his linear switch scanning, and then he moved on to the Go Talk Now app to expand his communication. He's now got access to a lot more vocabulary. So this is how it was set up for him, and this is how I've got mine set up today. So I've got a Praetorian applicator, which is the Bluetooth switch interface, and a Jelly Bean switch attached to it. And that little guide there that I'm hoping Gillian will post into the chat is a nice little guide of how to set up a Praetorian applicator. But I'm just going to show you what you have to do on the iPad just to make sure it's connected, and then show you how that built-in scanning works. Okay, so I'll just drag this back up. Okay, so all you have to do if you want to put on the scanning within an app that has inbuilt scanning, like Sounding Board, Go Talk Now, Touch Chat, TG Snap, is go in to the settings. Oops. And again, in accessibility, but this time we're going to go down and find, we're going to find Bluetooth. Here we go here. So we just have to make sure that our Bluetooth is switched on. And then I've got my Praetorians coming up there connected. If it's not connected, you just have to kind of press it and make sure that you've kind of wake it up. And then I've got it set, this is the Praetorian applicator, I've got it set to number 5 setting, which is acting as a space. And I've got my switch plugged into the first switch port. So I know it's connected. And now I can go to, for example, my Sounding Board app. And in Sounding Board, I can have my settings. I've got my switch scanning switched on. You can have single or 2 switch scanning. So you could be having a move switch and a choose switch. But I'm going to have it as doing automatic scanning. So I've got it set for 3 seconds rate. And then when I go back into my board, I'm going to use I'll use a different board, How to Catch a Rainbow. I'll do this one. And now when I use my switch, I'm pressing the switch and it's going to scan through with a 3-second dwell time there, scan speed.
Turn the page.
And when I press my switch, I'm making the selection, and it's just a simple linear scan going through the options.
Oh no.
So that's just simple scanning set up with the Bluetooth switch interface, and that's on Sounding Board, and it just works the same way in something like Go Talk Now. That's built in as well. So if I go into Go Talk Now, I can swipe down Go Talk Now.
Yeah.
Oops, hang on. There you go. It's always a bit tricky getting into the settings. Go to the settings, and in the settings down here, I've got my scanning settings within Go Talk Now. I can decide again if I want 2 switches or if I want auto scanning, set my speed, etc., set scanning groups. There are quite a lot of settings for scanning within Go Talk Now. And it means when I play, it's the same idea. It's going to scan through the options, and you can set this up in all sorts of ways to scan from your last selection or go back to the beginning.
I went to the shops and I bought milk.
So it works in exactly the same way. Okay. I'm just going to turn that off just now. Okay, so that's built-in scanning, which is available in some of the AAC apps. For other apps, or if you want to use scanning across the iPad, then you need to use the built-in iOS scanning. So, for example, Grid for iPad uses that. So in Grid for iPad, there aren't scanning settings built into the app, but you can set up the scanning within the iOS. So in fact, I've got a little visual down there also, Gillian will hopefully post in the chat there. The switch control for iPad devices is a really nice step-by-step guide of how to set that up on the Smartbox Hub. So that's definitely worth checking out. But if I just show you here, if I go to my accessibility, so I would go down to my switch control, and in here, this is where you'd set up the switch control for iOS. So in the same way, you set up the number of switches, scanning style, the time, etc. And then the same Bluetooth switch interface will work, but you're going to be scanning across the iPad within, for example, Grid for iPad, but also you could be scanning across the whole iPad and choosing other apps as well. So that's really a really great development. And if you want to know what access methods are available in all the different AAC apps, a really good starting point is our AAC app wheel. So there is a key in there with a little red square around all the Switch accessible apps, and also an H for any that include head tracking. So that's another relatively new development. So on the iPad Pro, with apps like Predictable, Dialog AAC and Touch Chat, you can utilise head tracking using the camera on the iPad Pro with no external camera required. So that's a really exciting development too. But if you have a look at the app wheel, that'll give you a good overall picture of what accessibility features are built in to the most common and popular AAC apps. And then the kind of last thing to have a wee think about is eye gaze access. So this is obviously emerging on the iPad Pro. There are a few options out there. There's a TD Pilot from Tobii Dynavox with TD Snap. There's a Skyle available from Inclusive Technology, where you can use apps like Proloquo to go. And then there's the iRespond Hiru, which is another new device which we're looking forward to trying out, which has certain apps it will work alongside, including Predictable and Touch Chat. And there's a couple of links that hopefully Gillian will pop in the chat about those, so you can find out more about eye gaze access. So it's something that we get asked about quite a lot now, about having eye gaze access to the iPad. So again, another emerging access method that means that the iPad and AAC apps are just becoming more and more accessible to more and more learners. So that's great news. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there because we're just over 20 minutes there. If anyone has any direct questions they'd like to ask, or anything that they'd like to let us know about, then please get in contact. We'd be really happy to hear from you. But just now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if there's any questions and any chat before we finish up. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen just now.
There was just one question there about which app you were showing. It was a sounding board app, so I've responded to that in the chat. But yeah, if there's any more questions from anybody, we've got a few minutes for that. So either come on your microphone or type into the chat. I'm sure Joanna will be happy to help with any questions.
Or anything that you found useful that we've maybe not mentioned. Be good to hear as well.
It's just great to see how the accessibility has developed with the iPad, because I think that was the one thing that was missing, wasn't it, when it first came out? Yes. Voice control, Phoebe's asking about, Joanna.
Are you asking?
No, I was just more saying that
yeah.
I worked with someone that used voice control, but that wasn't from a communication point because they were verbal, but they had no hand function and they controlled their iPad purely through voice control. And then I worked with another service user who used an eye gaze AAC device separately, and then she got all the numbers programmed into her eye gaze AAC so she could then do voice control on the iPad. even though she could probably have just used one device, she wanted to use one device to control the other device. It was quite amazing, really.
It's amazing what you can achieve if you put your mind to it, isn't it? A question about the various Bluetooth switch interfaces. I was just saying that I particularly like the Praetorian applicator because it's simple to set up, but you can also control other things on your iPad like music and other apps. And I find it really easy to set it up. Really nice little sort of control instructions on the back telling you if you want to do this, this is the number you press in, you know, anything which has got the instructions stuck on the back gets a thumbs up from me. But really easy to set up and reliable, I would say. I think there was a link to that earlier, wasn't there, Gillian?
Yes,
the
yeah, and
yeah,
a couple of links to that.
Yeah.
In the chat. Yeah, it's actually the Bluetooth I carry in my toolbox. Just similarly, I find it's easy to set up too. It's got the inbuilt switches, so if the child can manage a very basic touch switch, you've actually got 2 inbuilt switches, but of course you can plug other switches into it as well if you need different types. So I would say they're probably much of a muchness in terms of how the connection with Bluetooth and reliability. They both do sometimes drop off just because that's what Bluetooth is like. But yeah, mostly reliable.
Yeah.
So that's Phoebe asking.
Into an iPad, not unless they've got a switch. Not unless it's a device that's iOS based, I don't think.
Yes. I think
that
there might have been a dongle called that. Is a hook that I have seen, which allows direct, but I'm not sure it works quite as well. But what does work really well, I've found, is if you're using a joystick or a mouse, you could certainly plug that directly in, or an alternative keyboard, for example. These can all be plugged directly in with the sort of USB adapter that you get for iPad. That works really well.
Then you'd be using the iOS scanning in there too.
Oh, another question?
I was wondering if there was lightning adapter, as iPads only usually have one port. Especially now yeah, something to keep an eye on, definitely.
Yeah. So the adapter is certainly for like the joystick, mouse, they connect to the lightning adapter. So and thankfully you get some that also allow you to plug in your mains as well at the same time as your USB. So which is useful. But just wondering whether we just finish up there now. Yep.
Lightning adapter too.
Really great. Thanks very much for all that information, Joanna. Well, I'm sure there's lots more that to learn about so far as accessibility, but that's a really good start and a good overview. So we will be, as I say, recording, because the webinar has been recorded, it will be available tomorrow for you to have a look at or share. But also to mention that there's a couple of other learning opportunities coming up. In fact, there's one tomorrow. I'm doing a qual course tomorrow, and I think there's a few places left on that if you're interested in learning about communication activities and opportunities for AAC. And that's tomorrow from 4 till 5. But our next webinar, just to flag that up, is on let me just get that date up, the 10th of May. And we've got Andrew Campbell from Text Help, who's going to be talking about Fluency Tutor for Google, which is it's an app designed to help students improve reading fluency while saving teachers sort of valuable time. So yeah, look out for these and other learning opportunities. But I think otherwise, I'll thanks very much for coming along, and I wish everybody anything further from you, Joanna.
No, thanks everyone for coming, and yep, hope it was useful, and yep, thanks for the information you've given us too. It's always good to learn what people are using out there and get some get some tips from you guys as well.
Yep.
Thanks.
And yeah, wish everybody a good evening.
Have a nice evening.
Yep.